Fun. Here with us, the Club for Growth Vice President for Government Affairs, Andy Roth, and also the former DNC official Pablo Manriquez, who's a former Hispanic Chamber of Commerce official and the co-founder at K Street. Good to see you both.
Good to see you, Connor.
Andy, I'll go to you first on on this essential question of getting things done. I mean, we're going to hear about Afghanistan tonight. Some have argued that's kind of a change the subject type of speech after what we saw last week. But as I said, there was a lot of talk about tax reform today. A lot of promises were made and have been made. But this is not a president with a lot of friends right now in Washington in terms of getting votes. How does he accomplish anything, essentially?
He needs to be focused, and I think that there is a lot of focus going on. It was very good to see the Senate Majority Leader with the Treasury Secretary today. As you know, both of them, along with four of their colleagues, issued that Big Six statement a few weeks ago about how there is unity between congressional leaders in the White House. So all of that is very good news. It's all optimistic. What needs to happen now, though, is for the president to talk about tax reform every day and twice on Sundays throughout September and October.
Right, not hold an event on infrastructure and then take questions that turns into what it turned into last week, to actually stay on message and talk about that message, which has been a challenge for this president. Let me play something Steve Mnuchin, Pablo, said, the Treasury Secretary, today before I ask you about it. Here's what he said about tax reform.
Say we're 100% committed to getting it done. I'd like to think there's bipartisan support, or some bipartisan support. The issues that we're focused on, tax reform, are good for the American worker. They're good for the middle class. This is about making business competitive, and making business competitive is about making jobs.
Okay, I heard bipartisan there, Pablo, and I'll read you a tweet from the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and he said today, the Democrats' tax reform is clear. We believe strongly that, quote, or that hashtag, not one penny, go to the top 1%, and that any tax reform must be deficit neutral. I don't know about bipartisanship. What do you say?
Right. Talk about a really confusing set of circumstances as tax reform goes forward, because as we all know, with Steve Bannon's firing on Friday, it's become more of a conversation within the White House of, I guess, globalist versus nationalist economic agenda. And what we have right now is clearly in the White House, with the absence of Bannon, that the globalist agenda seems to be working out. But more specifically, it seems like, and I think that it's been reported very well on FBN, that the disagreements that have gone on within the West Wing over the last couple of months about what tax reform should look like, whether it should be a tax cut for the wealthy or a tax cut for the middle class, or how we could afford both, and so on. So it's not exactly
the
clear
Democrats,
what they're going
question
for.
On bipartisanship, Pablo, they're not going to work on any of those issues with this president, more or less, and he has enough trouble, by the way, in his own caucus. But
I think it would be difficult to get Democrat support at this point, honestly, and I don't want to change the subject away from tax reform, because I agree with both of you that tax reform is incredibly important.
Right.
But I also think that the red meat that was the Charlottesville response is something that's going to continue to linger, for better or worse. So,
and if nothing else, by the way, that takes up time, right? I mean, that's going to be a conversation that people are having. They'll call for censure and all this kind of thing when they come back, and then you're not talking, Andy, about tax reform. I mean, it's another. You used the word focus when we started this conversation. It's another way where the president's focus could be drawn in another direction. What should he be focused on specifically? Is it corporate taxes? Is it some kind of big tax reform package? Go small, go big? What do you think?
I promised my family I would incorporate an eclipse analogy, and tax reform is about as rare as an eclipse, and we need it. And when it comes, we have to do it right.
Right.
And our view is that it's got to be comprehensive tax reform. It should be corporate tax reform, individual tax reform, all of those small businesses that have to pass through their income into the individual code. That's important. And one thing that we're also asking the White House to do, and the president can do this with just his signature, is an executive order indexing capital gains to inflation. Now, that may not sound like a big deal to a lot of people, but that will ignite the economy
Something
overnight.
to help markets, right, too, and stuff like that.
And it would be a great down payment for this debate. It would basically be the White House saying, we're ready to do this, and here's the very first step that we're going to do right now.
Okay, guys, thanks a lot. We'll come back to you. Now, we've talked, obviously, about taxes. We've talked about Afghanistan, but there's more going on. We have the battle on the border over immigration.